Today when you think of world powers, it's two that comes to mind. You have the United States, which is the current undisputed power, and then you have the rising power, China. Now you may then immediately come to the conclusion that it's in the world's best interest to have them not get in a war against one another. So then why is that seemingly becoming ever so more imminent, and out of all things, it's over a tiny island in the Pacific? Better yet, how on earth would China approach such a war considering the US is still dominant in military power? And how exactly would this affect us all, including why that tiny island in the Pacific is relevant to us? These are all questions that are becoming ever so more relevant in the course of time, especially now that we are starting to expect such a war to happen. It's no longer a matter of if, but rather a matter of how. Or in other words, how would China perform, especially considering that unlike for instance Russia, they haven't displayed their military capabilities to the world at all the way since the Korean War back in the 50s, which was of course a completely different time and China was nowhere near what it is now. Before getting right into it, this video has been influenced by Unrestricted Warfare, which goes in depth as to how war can be reshaped against a much larger adversary, and it's written by two colonels of the People's Liberation Army, so we can give an idea of its application into the real world. Now with that, let's get right into it.
China has always been threatening Taiwan for years.
Taiwan, a country so relevant in the global political stage with most of us knowing so little about it. After the Chinese Civil War between the Communist forces and the nationalists, the latter had fled mainland China to Taiwan. Despite that, Beijing, now being governed by the CCP, insisted on Taiwan being a part of China. So Taiwan realized they needed something to ensure their survival, a sort of leverage, an economic one. And that's where semiconductors come into play. In 1976, the government convinced the Radio Corporation of America, or RCA, based in the US, to transfer semiconductor technology to Taiwan. And by 1987, the infamous TSMC, or Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, had been established. The company which holds a 90% share of advanced chip manufacturing, chips which are used in computers, mobile phones, to even your cars. So it's clear to see what kind of monopoly the Taiwanese company holds. This now means that any disruption in Taiwan isn't just a regional issue, but a global crisis. But the question that may come to mind now is, why does China care so much about Taiwan in the first place? Historically, Taiwan has been seen as a breakaway province, an idea deeply rooted in China. Politically and ideologically, reclaiming Taiwan is seen as a matter of national pride and territorial integrity. But there's more. Taiwan's economic and technological prowess, embodied by TSMC and other high-tech industries, represents a critical asset that Beijing can't afford to lose. China is the largest importer of chips by a long shot, and they import these chips from US allies such as Taiwan and South Korea, which in other times means that their chip supplies could be cut off at any moment by the United States as they so please, whether it's in the case of war, or the US wanting to stay ahead in the AI race. But how would China go about achieving this? That's where unrestricted warfare comes to play. Unlike traditional warfare, which is defined by tanks, fighter jets, and infantry, unrestricted warfare proposes that modern conflicts can be fought on multiple fronts simultaneously, through cyber attacks, economic subversion, media manipulation, and even legal warfare. Imagine a scenario where China launches a series of cyber attacks designed not to destroy physical infrastructure outright, but to cripple the digital nerve center of TSMC's operations. In today's interconnected world, a successful cyber intrusion could disrupt global supply chains overnight, leaving the tech industry reeling. Alongside cyber warfare, China could employ economic warfare, using its massive economic clout to impose pressure on countries aligned with Taiwan. Sanctions, trade barriers, or targeted investments in strategic centers could be used as economic sabotages, gradually undermining Taiwan's economic stability without ever firing a single shot on the battlefield. Then there's the plane of information and psychological warfare. Through a barrage of disinformation campaigns and controlled media narratives, China could sow seeds of internal discord within Taiwan, erode public trust in its government, and even shift international opinion. Moreover, unconventional tactics could extend to what some might call legal warfare, or lawfare, using international law and treaties as a tool of coercion. By carefully crafting legal challenges and mobilizing state-sponsored entities, China might attempt to legitimize its claims and isolate Taiwan diplomatically, making it increasingly difficult for the global community to support its independent stance. Each of these methods, individually or in combination, encapsulates the essence of unrestricted warfare. They are designed to blur the lines between peace and conflict, enabling a state to achieve strategic objectives without an all-out conventional war. And when you consider the stakes, a critical piece of the global tech puzzle and a flashpoint in US-China relations, it becomes clear that these are not just abstract theories, but very real possibilities in our increasingly multipolar world. As we briefly mentioned before, the issue of Taiwan would not just be an area of concern regionally, but certainly globally. First, let's talk about shipping and global trade. Taiwan sits along some of the busiest maritime routes in the world. Any instability or outright conflict in the region would have immediate and severe impacts on shipping lanes that are crucial for international trade. Remember a few years back when the Suez Canal was blocked by a cargo ship for just 6 days? $10 billion were lost every single day. Now imagine a scenario where cyber attacks or economic pressure force major shipping companies to reroute or suspend services. The result? A domino effect that disrupts global supply chains, drives up costs, and triggers shortages in everything from consumer electronics to automobiles. Next, consider the tech industry. With TSMC at the heart of semiconductor manufacturing, any disruption in Taiwan would send shockwaves throughout the global economy. We're talking about potential halts in production for major tech giants around the world, a ripple effect that could slow down everything from smartphone production to cutting-edge research in artificial intelligence and autonomous vehicles. Beyond the economic fallout, conflict in the Taiwan Strait would have geopolitical reverberations. Countries around the world, especially those heavily dependent on global trade, would be forced to re-examine their alliances and security arrangements. In Europe, for example, nations might reconsider their reliance on global supply chains if they see the fragility of these systems exposed by a crisis in Asia. Similarly, emerging economies that depend on stable trade routes would find themselves caught in the crossfire of strategic recalibrations and power plays. Moreover, the digital front isn't immune. Cyber warfare by its very nature does not respect borders. A successful cyber campaign launched against Taiwan's technological infrastructure can easily spill over, affecting financial systems, public utilities, and even critical government operations in other parts of the world. The interconnectedness of our modern digital ecosystem means that an attack on one node can rapidly cascade into a global crisis. For more information about cyber warfare as a whole, I highly recommend checking out The Future of War, which will be linked for you to watch. What this all tells us is that an unconventional conflict over Taiwan isn't just a regional issue, it's a global one. The strategies outlined in Unrestricted Warfare are designed to maximize impact while minimizing overt aggression, ensuring that the consequences are felt worldwide, whether it's through economic destabilization, cyber disruption, or the manipulation of public perception. The ripple effects of such a conflict would touch every corner of the globe. Now, before we draw any definitive conclusions, it's important to underscore one crucial point. War in any form remains fundamentally irrational. Even as we map out these sophisticated and multi-pronged strategies, the unpredictability of human behavior in global politics means that no one can truly predict when or if such a conflict will ignite. The reality is that while at this stage of war with Taiwan is expected, it isn't guaranteed. You cannot predict war. Modern warfare, with all its unconventional facets, is as much about deterrence and calculated restraint as it is about aggression. Leaders on all sides are painfully aware of the catastrophic consequences that any misstep could unleash, not just on their own nations, but on the entire world. Yet the spectre of unconventional conflict continues to loom large. As nations invest in cyber defenses, economic safeguards, and rapid response strategies to counter disinformation, we are witnessing a paradigm shift in how power is projected and defended in the 21st century. So where does that leave us? In a world where the traditional rules of war no longer apply, best defense is vigilance and understanding. While the tactics outlined in Unrestricted Warfare may seem like science fiction, they're increasingly becoming part of our reality. They remind us that conflict can take many forms that are often subtle, insidious, and far-reaching. It's crucial to remember that predicting war is an exercise in futility. The irrational nature of conflict means that while we can map out potential scenarios, the true course of events is always subject to sudden change. This uncertainty doesn't mean we should live in constant fear. Rather, it should inspire us to demand transparency, dialogue, and proactive measures that reduce the risk of escalation.